To start off, we're just going to take our needles. You can use either a circular needle or 2 regular needles. I like to use the circular needles because, you know, I always drop one, or if I'm knitting on a plane, I don't want it to fall. So I just happen to use those a lot, and a lot of the projects I do are in the round anyway, so that's kind of what I have around. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with our yarn, and we will start with a slip knot. So what we're going to do is take the tail, have the tail going to our left and the ball on our right, and using the ball side of the yarn, we're going to wrap around our first finger and create an X. So you have that X facing you, and then 2 yarns on top of your first finger. So we're going to take the yarn closest to your nail and put it over the back yarn, and then pull that back yarn through. And that creates a slip knot, and that can be adjusted using the ball side of the yarn. So the next step is we're going to take the loop and put that onto our needle, and then just gently adjust the tension. So you want this to be snug but not too tight. So you should be able to move it pretty easily, but it shouldn't be just like falling off your needle. Okay, so the next step is the cast on. So that kind of sets the foundation for your knitting. So we're gonna do about 10 stitches just as a demo. So you'll start out holding your needle with your left hand. I always make sure that I put my first finger on my left hand on top of the most recent stitch that I made, because that keeps everything from falling off the needle, and that just kind of helps me control what I'm working on. Then with the tail side of the yarn in front and the ball behind, I'm gonna go ahead and take my 2 fingers, my first finger and my thumb, kind of make a little pinchy shape with them, and split the 2 yarns, making sure that the tail is still in front and the ball is still in the back. Then I'm just going to bring the needle down below the level of my fingers to create this kind of X shape. Let me show you that again. To create this X shape at the thumb. You can see that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the needle from underneath and go into that loop that I created with my thumb, wrap my first finger around to create the stitch, and then just drop that loop over the needle. And now I can control that with the thumb just to like snug that up. So now you have 2 stitches. One is your slip stitch, and the next one is your first real stitch. So we're just going to repeat that again. So go take the needle below the level of your thumb to create this X, to create a loop on your thumb. Go into the loop from underneath, loop over with your first finger to create your stitch, and then loop the thumb thread over the needle again, and then adjust it gently with your thumb. Okay. So we're just going to do a few stitches like that. And just gently snug. So you don't want these stitches to be super tight because it'll make it really hard for your first row. So you want them just to be nice and snug, but still able to move on the needle. So again, you'll see that I'm holding the stitches in place with my left hand, just to adjust where they are on the needle without letting the stitches fall off. So it's really easy for these stitches to just like slip to the front and fall off if you don't hold them. So that's why I like to hold them in place. So it becomes one really simple fluid motion once you get the hang of it. But into the thumb loop from underneath, around the front of the needle with your first finger, and then back over. So always make sure that the thumb loop gets taken all the way over. It's pretty easy for it to just get stuck here, and then you end up with a double stitch. But then it's also not really properly regulated in the way that it should be. It will be a little bit tighter and it won't look nice and clean at the bottom. So at the bottom, you just have this very clean row of stitches. as you can see here. It's just the beginning of your stitch work. Okay, so I'm gonna do a few more stitches and then we'll move on to the first row. This is just like a very basic cast on. There are a lot of other cast ons. I actually don't use this one that much anymore. I like to use more of an Italian cast on or a tubular cast on because it does create a stretchy edge. But this one's a really good one to start with. And it's quite versatile. You can use it for pretty much anything. And it's a little bit easier to control than some of the other cast-ons. Okay, so I always knit with the yarn from the ball on my left hand. A lot of people knit and use the right hand. I find this is super efficient because you're holding the yarn there and you don't have to like then move your right hand. It's already there and you just loop it through. So what I'm gonna do is from the underside of the first stitch, I'm just going to take the needle and put it into the stitch. I'm going to sort of loop my first finger around and then I'm just going to pull that through to create the first stitch. Now I'm going to slide that off of the needle. Okay, so we're just going to repeat that. So we're going to go from underneath in the loop. You can see how you can see what it looks like, and then loop with the first finger of the left hand and then pull it through. So now this is just a knit stitch. And the main difference between the knit and purl, those are your two most basic stitches. The main difference is the direction that the loops go. So in a knit stitch, you're pushing the loop edge towards the back of your work, and then in a purl stitch, you would be pulling that loop to the front. So you can see how you have these little bumps on the back and it's pretty smooth on the front. That is your knit stitch. And I'm just gonna keep that going. And continue along. So into the underside of the stitch, loop it around, and you can use your first finger on your right hand to just hold that thread in place so that it doesn't fall off your needle, because it's really easy for it to fall off your needle if you don't hold it in place. And so I find that that's super helpful, especially in the first row where things are a little bit wonky. So just hold it in place, see it won't go anywhere, it won't fall off your needle, and then you can just pull it through that stitch and then drop that stitch off of the left needle. So we're almost done with our first row. Now I forgot to count how many stitches I cast on. I would cast on about 20 stitches. That should give you enough runway to work from. Still getting used to knitting and looking through the camera. And almost done. And you get to the end of the row. This one is especially easy for it to slip off, and the slip stitch sometimes is a little bit tighter than your other stitches, so definitely hang on to that stitch as you knit it. And there you go. So that's your first row. That's just your basic knit stitch. So we're just gonna repeat that over and over to get a swatch. So now, one thing that you'll do when you start your next row is you want to take the thread and push it towards the back of your work, because we are knitting, so we always want to keep our thread towards the back. So into the loop from underneath, pull it through, and then take your stitch off. So again, we're just repeating the exact same thing where you're just going to take your needle, your right needle, put it into the loop from the left side of the left needle, sorry, and you're going to go from underneath, loop this around, and then pull it through. How you do your basic knit stitch. So next time we will do a basic purl stitch and move on from there. Those are going to be your two most basic stitches that most other patterns and stitches are based off of. So now you have your loops on this side, you have your little loops on this side, and that's just your standard, most basic knit.